Welcome in. Adam here, the Orlando drummer. Good to see you, and thank you for tuning in to another video. In today's video, we're going to be taking a look at two very popular interfaces from Focusrite, the Scarlett 18i20 and the Clarett 8 Pre-X. Let's do it. Now, I'm sure you know that the Scarlett is the more budget-friendly option, coming in around $500, and the Clarett is a little bit more than double that, a little over $1,000. And if you're like me, these two price points put you in kind of a weird position. It can be pretty tough to justify spending double the money on an interface when you can get the Scarlett, which effectively does the same thing. So in today's video, I wanted to offer a really honest comparison of the actual sounds of these two units, because that's definitely the most important thing. But beyond that, we're going to get into some of the tactical differences between these two interfaces, and of course, we'll also talk about some pros and cons of both the Scarlett and the Clarett, so you can hopefully pick the right one for your studio. So let's start out by just doing an A-B comparison using only the overheads on this kit. Our overhead mics are AKG C414s. I'm going to play 2 bars of groove on the Scarlett, followed by 2 bars of that same groove on the Clarett. Let's check it out. Now, one of the biggest benefits of having the Clarett is the air feature. You can enable the air feature on any one of the 8 channels, and it adds this airy mid-high presence that replicates the old school ISA preamps. So let's enable that air feature on both of our overhead channels in the Clarett and see what that sounds like against the natural sound of the Scarlett. Next, let's do an A-B comparison using just the hi-hat. We have another AKG C414, and again, I'm going to play 2 bars of groove with the Scarlett and 2 bars of groove with the Clarett. Now, the first time we do this, it's just going to be the raw Scarlett compared to the raw Clarett, but the second time through, I'm going to enable that air feature so you can really hear the difference between the units. Let's do it. Now, let's go on to a comparison of just the snare and the toms. For our snare mic, we're using an SM81. For our rack tom, we're using another C414. And over on the floor tom, we have an MD421. Again, the first time through, we're just going to have Scarlett versus Clarett. And then when we repeat this comparison, I'll have the air feature enabled on all 3 of these drum channels. Let's see what it sounds like. And to really test the low end of these interfaces, I thought it would be a good idea to just isolate the kick drum and do an A-B comparison of that. Now, I likely wouldn't use the air feature of the Clarett on the kick channel, so what you're going to hear now is just the natural sound of the Scarlett preamp versus the natural sound of the Clarett preamp. For our kick mic, we're using an Audix D6, so we should have no shortage of lows and low mids to work with. And fair warning, if you're listening through a phone, you might not hear too big of a difference, so definitely recommended that you listen to this part with near-field monitors or at least headphones. Let's see what it sounds like. And just for fun, my audio engineer Joe Hodgen did a full mix of this drum set. Now, the mix that he did was done to a recording of the Clarett, and we had the air feature enabled on only the overhead mics. He then took the attributes of that mix and essentially pasted them onto an identical recording that was made with the Scarlett. This way we were able to really avoid touching the mix, because it's obviously going to be easy to compensate for stuff if we mix these individually. So what you're about to hear is effectively one drum mix applied to two separate recordings, one made with the Scarlett and one made with the Clarett. Remember that on the Clarett recording, we had the air feature enabled on only the overheads, and if you want to learn more about the mics used in this recording, check out the link in the description. Let's see what it sounds like. Now, while it's obvious that the Clarett has the better sounding pre's, I'm still getting some sounds out of the Scarlett that are totally usable. Remember that everything you've heard in this video so far, with the exception of the last example, has been raw, straight out of the interface. So if you heard something that you didn't like from either the Scarlett or the Clarett, well, you can edit that. For me, the Scarlett delivers a sound that could totally be transformed into a sick drum mix. The Clarett just gets you a little closer to that finished sound and would likely require a little bit less work in editing because it already sounds pretty good. Of course, the most dramatic difference between these two interfaces is when we enable that air feature, because it becomes pretty obvious which is the more expensive interface. But for you, that air feature might not be worth $500 or $600 if that's the only reason you're interested in the Clarett. After owning and using both of these interfaces for a while, I can definitely see where they both have their own place in the market, and I think the prices are justified respectively. Now, while the sound of the preamps is definitely the most important thing, it shouldn't be the only factor that you're considering when you're shopping for a new interface. With the Clarett, the extra $500 or $600 that you're spending doesn't just go towards the preamps. There's a lot of other things that that interface can do, which make the recording process go a lot smoother. So here's a few things to keep in mind about the Clarett 8 Pre-X. First off, I love that this interface is so physically big because it allows for a large dedicated space on the front of the unit for every channel. It feels easier to see what's going on, and that visibility allows me to navigate the interface a little bit quicker. The preamps themselves are also really impressive, and you definitely just get what you pay for as far as overall sound quality. Of course, the air feature is an added bonus, as this certainly adds some characteristics that are tough to replicate in post. Using Thunderbolt means less latency and an overall very reliable connection. And finally, who am I kidding? This unit is absolutely gorgeous. The craftsmanship, color, and design of the Clarett were done extremely well, and you won't mind having this unit on display anywhere in your studio. There's really not too much in the way of cons with the Clarett. It's big and bulky, taking up 2 rack spaces, and I guess that could be a problem if you're tight on space. It's also a bit more expensive, coming in at twice the price of the Scarlett, but aside from these two things, I have nothing to complain about. Now let's talk about the Scarlett 18i20. The biggest benefit of the Scarlett is clearly the price. The $500 price range gets you so far nowadays, and this interface performs incredibly well for what it costs. The preamps on the Scarlett are really impressive compared to previous generations in Focusrite's lineup, and I find these preamps significantly cleaner than the preamps that came with my Sapphire Pro 40. The Scarlett also includes some pretty badass software like Pro Tools First and Ableton Live Lite, which are awesome starter tools to have if this is your first venture into the world of recording. The construction on the Scarlett is every bit as solid as the Clarett, and of course it's nice that we can also run ADAT through this unit. I also enjoyed having 2 headphone outputs, which was certainly something that Focusrite didn't have to include, but I'm definitely glad that they did. Now, much like the Clarett, there's really not too much to complain about with the Scarlett. You're getting a fantastic deal for the price, but of course there's always a little room for improvement. I would love to see this interface with the 2 front XLR inputs moved to the back. I personally don't love front-facing inputs, and if these were moved to the back, there would be more room to space out the controls on the face of the unit. I also found that with certain drum and mic configurations, I had to gain a little bit more than I'd like to get an appropriate signal, but nowhere near enough to actually add noise to the channel. My only other complaint would be that you can only group phantom power in channels 1 through 4 or channels 5 through 8 at a time, so as needed phantom power isn't really an option. Of course, this doesn't mean that you're going to blow up your dynamic mics, but if you're into vintage ribbon mics, this might not be the best choice for you. Alright guys, that's all I have for you in this video, but I hope you enjoyed it. I made this video because I was once in the position of having to choose between the Scarlett and the Clarett, and I know how weird of a decision that can be because there's so many things to consider. So I made this video in hopes that the audio comparisons and some of the information in this video could make that decision a little bit easier for you and hopefully save you some time. But please keep in mind that you really can't go wrong with either interface. There's so many other things that contribute to a good recording, and if all of those other things are in place, you're not going to have trouble with either one of these. If you got a good drum set, good heads, it's tuned well, good microphones, the microphones are placed well, either one of these interfaces could record drums good enough to make it on a platinum album. Thanks for tuning in, guys. Adam here, the Orlando Drummer, and I will catch you in the next video. Later.